I kind of feel like the same as Calvin, right? Like we're talking about it kind of in like the chat and stuff like that, and really wanted to do a lot of research on it, and ended up watching that video. And I think the most disturbing part of that video is the fact that as he's running and approaching this vehicle, he tries to avoid it. He tries to move out, like literally move away from these guys and avoid the altercation. And these guys are instigating this altercation. And I think that that's the part that for me is the most upsetting. Like this innocent guy, like at the point where if he's not innocent, you would have seen him instigate that conversation. Because even for myself, where I may lack, if I am approached by a couple guys with guns and stuff like that, I'm gonna be honest, my first reaction isn't gonna be, yo, let me avoid this situation. I'm gonna say something.
Run. You're gonna do something.
No, I'm gone.
You're out. Yeah, like, run up, get done up. It's really what happened, right?
Oh my god! Like, oh, sorry.
Can I jump?
Yeah, you go finish, O'Shea. Go finish.
It's wild to see that. And I think to kind of touch on, like, a lot of you guys are saying like the racism is different in the States than it is here. I would beg to differ, man. I don't think it's different. I think a lot of the times we look at the racism with a certain race, a certain group, and we look at a lot of the times we look at what, and I'm not even gonna put it in quotation, I'm gonna just say white people but white people with black people and racism like that. But us in Canada, we're probably just as bad. If you look at a lot of the Aboriginal people that our government has literally forced out,
right,
forcefully, like we forget a lot about that. Like that's not something that is happening or has happened 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Like that's stuff that's happening right now. There's a lot of stories that we don't hear about our Aboriginal people because those stories don't come down to us. So I honestly don't think that we're that far off from the States. I feel like, yeah, it might be a little bit different in a sense of certain stuff, but we're unfortunately not that far off. And even the reality of it, and I think Adam may have touched on it a little bit, like us as believers, us as people of faith, we understand that no sin is greater than the other. We understand that if you shoot someone and kill someone, you're looked at the same way by God if you were to tell a lie. And the same thing happens when it comes to racism. If we look at racism as this overlapping thing, then no matter if someone is verbally being racist or physically and bringing that to an altercation of racism, it's still the same root issue of racism that just needs to stop. So I don't even think we should be looking at it in that sense of, oh, it's worse in the States because people are getting shot, or it's not as bad here because it's subliminal and it's more verbal and it's more behind the scenes kind of thing.
Adam, you gonna jump in?
Yeah, it's just a quick headline that, I'm reading. I just progressively reading up on this, and it's just insane that like the GA, the former Georgia District Attorney, didn't see grounds for arresting two white men who shot and killed Ahmaud. Like that's insanity. You reverse that role, and it's like, are you kidding me? They're kicking in your door without even the proof of a video. They're kicking in your door. They're dragging you out. It's just it's absolutely it's mind-boggling.
And they're doing that on national television, by the way. Yeah,
of course.
Look at O.J. Simpson.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
That's a whole other.
It's a whole other thing, but the reality is
it's a production. It's always a production.
I get what he's saying.
I get what you're saying. It's always a production.
Right? Yeah.
It's always a production.
Live on Cops.
All right, Bart.
My thing is always like, how do we get here, and how do we move forward individually and other people? The getting here part, I don't know if there's a remedy. I strongly agree with O'Shea. It is the same thing here as it is in the States. It may present itself in different ways, and it may have different outlooks, but it hurts so much when you see this type of stuff happen, because it's not just a loss of life, but it's the loss of potential, and we need more of that potential. You know what I mean? Like, we are a people, and this
But
could
it's
lead
also
into
a senseless loss of life too.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Like,
I always just think of, like, how is it that this still happens? That people of different races and different cultures still, first of all, believe that you have the right to take someone's life. I don't think a black person could do that. You know what I mean? In the sense of, I feel so enraged right now that this white person or another race has been breaking into homes, into my neighborhood. I'm just gonna go out and start shooting people, or shoot somebody that I see that could be that person.
Well, the reason why that still exists goes into what Adam said. It's the whole spirit behind it still exists. Like, that hasn't stopped. The spirit that from hundreds of years ago still exists to this day. And when we're talking about Canada versus America, it is the same. The difference is the release that individuals have, or the ability to be able to do it. But I just want to
hate speech in Canada versus hate speech, and how people are allowed to, the freedom of speech rather, in the United States are very prominent things. We have a lot of Americans would say oppressive speech in terms of how I can talk about another race or another group of people, whereas in the States, it is very much what I say is my right to its core, or whether it's wrong, or whether it's inflammatory, or whether it hurts you. So it's one of those things where there is a difference in how we approach conflict. But at the same time, I can't get over the fact that people of different races still view somebody with a different skin tone with malice, in the sense that if it's dark outside, because I also am dark, now people are afraid, and they get afraid to the point where they call the police, or afraid to the point where they walk on the other side, they cross, afraid to the point, you know what I'm saying? But the inverse is not true. It's never bright enough outside that I'm going to cross the street because there's too many light-skinned people, white people, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, how is it that because my nose is broad and I got big lips and I got furry hair, or whatever the case is, somehow there is a disconnect that we're all still humans. I still can't get over, like, I know there's a lot of history in America.
Because we're not all viewed as humans.
But guys, it's a little bit more than that, because it all comes down to, we are not fighting a battle of flesh and blood.
For sure.
We're fighting a sinful nature, and that's going to manifests in how we talk to each other, how we interact with each other, how we deal with each other. Because when you read this article, you read something about the DA. What you didn't realize is that's the third DA. Two other DAs actually recused themselves from the case because they had.
How could that be?
Because
how could it be such a blatant crime, and DAs are recusing themselves
because they had connection with the man who shot them. Because the man was a former police officer.
And how does that stop you from practicing justice? That's what I want to know.
Well, but here's the other thing. This shooting didn't happen last week or this week. It happened in February.
Right.
So
whole other factor.
That's a whole other factor, whereas it happened in February, and now they're just getting to it. And they're going to bring it to a grand jury, but because of everything, the grand jury might not even happen until June, July, or August. So there's a whole messed up thing there. But then you go to the next one with Sean Reed. And that's a little bit more murky because, if you watch the Facebook video, he's taunting police. He's calling the mother effer this, he's doing this. And so then you've got one side of a man who's walking perfectly fine, has no problem, and then another man who's antagonizing people. Right. And you're like, man, why are you making people look at us like that? And to make it all even worse, the man who shot him, the police officer who shot him, was black.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen there? That's a whole nother story, because
that's
all of a sudden, is he going to get charged all of a sudden?
Yeah, but
now he's going to get charged.
That might be also the reason why we've heard of that. We've heard of that story right off the bat. Yes, it was on Facebook Live, but that whole black cop thing, they made sure that got out quick.
Oh, of course they did.
Of course
they did. Of course. And that's my point.
It was sad to see it. It was evident.
That's my point.
So is it the result is the same then? Whether you're a law-abiding citizen who is innocent, or whether you're a criminal who is flaunting his flagrant disregard for the law, you end up dead. That's the message. message then. Cool.
Well, the message, I think the message is that can't be the message. We have to try and change the narrative.
That can't be the message, but that's the message, man.
That is the message. And when I'm saying that, I'm not saying that loosely, because like I told you guys off air last week, every stage of my life, I have been pulled over by cops. Junior high, high school, middle-aged, young adult, and middle-aged young adult now. I've been either profiled or whatever. But the thing is, you have to decide how you're going to act, because we can act in two ways. One will get us killed for sure, or the other way, at least we have a chance to survive and see our kids and our family.
We've all had the talk, no?
Yeah. The problem is that we have to have the talk. That's because I can distinctly remember in high school talking about the talk to some of my white friends, and they had no clue what
100%.
They don't get it.
And I was like, what do you mean you haven't had the talk?
Yep. The talk is different for them.
The talk is totally different for them.
The talk is, if you're in trouble, you go to these people. Right? For us, the talk is, hey, when these people come to you, hands up, and you
or
don't
hands on the dash.
Exactly. And you don't mouth off like you normally would.
Don't make any big movements. We all know what it like.
Music, just chill, put your hands on the dash, and literally answer yes, sir, no, sir. Whatever they do, you do what you know. Oh my goodness.
Because a 14-year-old is threatening to a police officer, and they can get agitated, and then a gun could go off or a beating could happen, because this is what happens.
So I'm listening to everyone, and I'm agreeing and I'm angry with all of you at the same time. And I'm not angry at you, but just angry at the topic that we're talking about. Because, and someone said it, if you act the fool, there's a very strong possibility. And I said, like, if you act a certain way, there's one way you might end up being shot. And the other way, if you don't do those things, you might end up being shot. Yeah. But you still, I mean, Tariq Rice, he's playing cops and robbers at 12 years old with a BB gun outside.
In the park with his friends.
In the park. And police don't even get a chance to even say, what are you doing? He's a kid playing with a toy in Walmart. It's not even like he's not running, he's just playing. Someone sees him, they make a phone call, they make a judgment call. A guy is sitting in his own apartment building, eating ice cream, and a woman walks in and says, oh, you're in my apartment, and caps him.
Instead of saying freeze or you're under
or
what
are you doing
or whatever
or whatever else, or making herself known, she shoots him immediately, and then gets 10 years, gets 5 years, and probably out 3 years for good behavior, and on top of that gets hugged by the black judge. I understand, and forgive me for being negative. Forgive me for being negative, because I want to see this be better. But it doesn't get better until people understand that this is actually frustrating to people like us. Because we know that among ourselves. But people who are watching this, who we all have friends, and most of us have spouses who are Caucasian.
What's the ratio?
Let's not do that.
Quick maps.
No.
8 to 1.
Quick maps. We all have friends of our, and the idea of saying, when the police come, just let them do whatever they want. I could still die. We know, we've all had the talk. I know exactly when I get pulled over, my license and my registration are out of the window immediately, or they're on my front seat and my hands are on 12 and 2 immediately, and I still might not get home. That's the scary part, is that you can do all of the right things and you can meet a bad cop, and that's the end of it. Couple things. I just want to say a couple things. So I was writing some stuff down, right? Adam mentioned, the idea of white disarming and de-escalation versus black automatic escalation. We see it right now happening in the States. Right now we're in the midst of COVID, and we have people who are protesting
the
opening up of hair salons and the protesting, the opening up of bowling alleys. And what do we see? We see grown men with American flags around their necks, around their mouths, and they are carrying semi-automatic weapons in front of police, and they're yelling their heads off, and they're stepping on the flag. And I can't help but say, wait a minute, that's not de-escalation, because in 1964, the Mulford Act was signed in California by then Governor, now known as President Ronald Reagan, to remove the ability to hold firearms in public in California. Why? Because in Oakland, California, the Black Panther Party was carrying guns to protect and patrol their neighborhoods because the police were not coming there. And so they made a law making it illegal to carry guns in California, not to protect citizens, but to make sure that particular party of young Black men were unable to actually go and hold arms. Because God forbid they protect their neighborhood that the police weren't going to. And yet we're able to see in 2020, grown men yelling at police officers, yelling at them. And if you go and watch that on YouTube and then watch how people were treated in Ferguson, in St. Louis, after regardless of what Michael Brown did and how the story came out, to see police treat the people of Ferguson and burn that city down to the ground versus somebody in Michigan or wherever else, or in Texas, say, this is my right, there's a problem. And I think that a part of the solution that Andrew's saying is us having this sort of conversation in real time and sharing the frustration that we all feel, so that hopefully somebody watches this and goes, I need to do something different. I need to be better. I need to change my mentality on it. Because it is sinful nature. It is sinful nature. I agree with that. But the problem with the idea of sinful nature is that there are people in both America and in the States who are using scripture to define and defend why they are doing what they are doing.
Can I ask a quick question? Chief? I'm about to type it in. Like, is there a Christian response? What is the godly Christian moral response?
I have a response to that, actually.
Please, Andrew, teach me. I need someone to pray for me.
Mine is probably not as good as Andrew, so I will see the floor. Andrew.
Raise a hallelujah.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll raise a hallelujah.
I will sing a little louder.
Sing a little louder. There you go.
Louder than my unbelief.
In the presence of my enemies.
You know
right?
what? Let me know. Hold on. I will share. You're gonna stop. I'm gonna share what I'm gonna say. I'll share it after Tim and Jason. I want to hear them first, and then I'll respond to you, because I do have actually a response to what you just said, Bart. But I want to hear Jason and Tim first.
It's for me. I can honestly say it's like I have grown callous to hearing of another Black man, person of color, getting gunned down by a white man or white woman, someone who is white. It's one of those things that, like when it happened in February, I didn't know anything of it. I was probably busy doing something else, and it was only now that this like picked up steam on social media that I'm only hearing about what's going on, and it's one of those things that truthfully I have grown callous to it, because it's one of those things we look at what is the Christian response and everything else, and you have people on varying sides where they'll just be like, it's like, you know what? You just shut up, you put your head down, and you keep on going, because there is no other way to survive. It's like this is going to be our reality within our lifetime. And then you have other people that are like, let's make a stink, let's burn the house down. It's because they're not going to treat us any different anyways. But it's something that for me, I really don't know. I can't stand there with an articulate or well thought out answer. It's just something that when I think of it, and like even talking about like the Christian response with that question, it's like for me, I would say the big problem for ourselves is that we, as society, as humanity as a whole, have lost sight of the fact that we are all made in God's image. And it's something that you see that within Genesis 1, God says, and let us make man in our image. And then in Genesis chapter 3, they eat the fruit. And then literally all hell breaks loose, and you have people killing each other. You have people looking upon their elders and seeing their nakedness, and people's skins being darkened and everything else, which is a point of reference that like Christian white supremacists will use as to why we are inferior. And it's just one of those things that when you look at it, it's like it's like I don't know. It's like I was talking to a friend and she asked me the question, do you think people can change? And my response to her was like, I'm a pastor. If I don't think people can change, then what am I doing with my life?
It's good. It's true.
But it's hard, especially when you see moments like that. Or I remember back in Bible college, I was on a travel team, and we went to a town north of Guelph, Ontario. I won't say where, but we were. Two things happened. We had a host that had been living in that town for about 45 years. And that town itself is not on the top of the list for new immigrants immigrating to Canada and deciding to make Ontario their home. So for 45 years, the world surrounding them has changed. But in that little town, it's still white. And it's like we're there, and it's me, it's myself, another friend of mine who's Sri Lankan, and then a white guy, and it's like we're sitting at the dinner table without even him saying anything. The host is like, so how long were you a Muslim before you were a Christian?
Dead.
And
dead. Dead.
Wow.
I'd have lied. I would have lied and said 14 years, bro. 14 years. I'd have lied.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalam.
Malaikum.
But the reality is, what's funny about that? You guys think that that's a one-off, but I've got
It's
that
not.
too. It makes
we all got stories. We all got stories.
It was one of those things that like the next morning, it's like after finished leading worship Sunday, a little girl came up to me and was like, how did you get here? And I was like, oh, we rented a van and and drove from Peterborough. And she looked at me weird. It's like, but aren't you supposed to be in Africa?
Oh God.
Yeah, but is that just not? I mean, when you're like that, when you're that far north and like nobody comes to visit, like
North.
No.
Well,
Don't justify it.
That's ignorant.
Okay,
Guelph?
no, my bad. Well,
Yeah.
It's like 30 minutes. It's 30 minutes.
Yeah,
north
never
of
mind.
Guelph.
Yo, we're not talking about 50 years ago, fam. Like,
I was trying to
that's
defend.
a
I was trying to
decade.
defend people, but I can't defend Guelph.
I
That's
can't
too
defend
close.
that, man.
I want to hear what Jason has to say though.
Jay, what do you guys say on this?
Fun guy.
Yeah, fun guy.
Well,
Fun
Fun
guy.
guy.
Especially
He's
considering
American,
he's from the
right?
States. Yeah, yo.
Yeah, he's American perspective.
You know what? Just after hearing the story, and I know that the video was out, and I didn't want to see the video because I've heard the story before, seen the situation. 9 times out of 10, the people who do the shooting or who do the killing do not get off, and unfortunately, that's just America. And yeah, if I can say just like some of the differences that I've seen from America and Canada is America has always been a violent country. As a matter of fact, since its existence, I think it's only been out of war maybe 10 years. So whether that be World War II, War 1812, whatever, Vietnam, America, and even just how people act. One thing I've noticed since I became a resident here in Canada is people are nicer, more polite, and this is all the way around the board. This is all nationalities, all races. You go to America, everybody wants to fight. You do something wrong, people want to fight. Someone step on your shoes, people want to fight. You look at someone,
My Air
road
Force
rage,
Ones?
people shooting. So I mean,
I wouldn't mess with a guy that's wearing black Air Force Ones to begin with.
Facts. That's a standard rule across the board.
He's got
That's a
2
Toronto
guns.
thing.
He got 2 guns.
Facts.
Yeah. So I mean,
You got the heater.
so it's like when just seeing everything and even being a part of those type of situations. I know everyone gave their stories about issues with like police, and I had my issues that I'm not going to go in detail with, but living with that fear every day, and just like what Chris was saying, knowing and understanding, hey, okay, if I get pulled over by the police, anything can happen. And so it's such a tough situation that it takes prayer. And the issue with America has always been politics and racism. America has not got over racism. Nothing has really changed. I mean, if you think about it, ever, with the Civil War ended in 1865, and even though okay, it said blacks were given freedom, blacks weren't given freedom. My family, the Randalls, they originated from Virginia, and so they were able to get land, but eventually the white man started to take their land, and they weren't able to get it back. So the point I'm trying to say is that all throughout history, there's always been issues in the States, and nothing has really changed. And even right now, even from our president on down, there's 2 Americas, right? Literally, there's 2 Americas. Right. And even in the church, there's a difference, a divide in the church. You have most whites who vote Republican. You have most blacks and other minorities who vote in Democratic. And so there's no cohesion. I mean, nothing has really come together. And so even right now, it seems like that you would think the countries are going, that the country would be getting closer. It's actually going apart. And so what that means is people like us, it's dangerous. And so I will say one thing, I do feel like I'm safer here. But as far as people responding to me, and even my mother used to tell me about the story about my grandfather. So my grandfather fought in World War II, but he didn't like going to the South because he saw a black soldier lynch. So he would always come up to Canada every summer with him and my grandmother. And he did that for as long as I can remember. He would come up here, and they would come up here every year. They literally went all over Canada because they felt safe up here. And so it's really sad. And the worst part about it is we don't know how long it's going to take for things to change. Even when Obama became president, I'm like, yeah, we're on the right track. And then seeing Trump and this whole just starting with his campaign and just seeing, people are saying, okay, he's not going to be president. He's not going to get nominated. And then for him to be nominated and run under his ticket and then bring out more fear, bring out more racism, and bring out more hate and violence. And the reality is, America needs a lot of prayer. And I know that, and I'm just going to close and say, I know that there's racism and hate in pretty much every country in the world. If they're, whether it's the caste system or just skin color or background or refugees, anytime there's humans, there's always going to be a difference, or there's always going to be some group of people are not going to want to mix or be around each other. But it's just really sad. And, and the only thing that I can see changing is when people of color get in a position to actually be in the judicial system, to be judges. Even one of my friends, Marilyn, who was the DA in Baltimore, was able to make sure that the Freddie Gray case was taken care of. But she happened to be a black woman. If she wasn't a black woman, then those officers might have got off.